1. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to 10 Minutes with Griffin. I'm your host, Griffin Bridgers. This is an episode I'm really excited to bring to you, especially if you're a financial advisor, because what we're going to look at today are financial planning opportunities in situations where there's trusts that have been created or might be created for your clients in the future. We'll dig into that a bit more, but this is going to be a huge opportunity for a lot of CFPs in the future, and it's something that is flying under the radar. So we'll dive into why. But for the time being, I want to remind you that this presentation is not intended to substitute for legal or tax advice and is provided for educational purposes only. Now, if you'd like a copy of these slides, please email me at griffin.bridgers@gmail.com. Now, usually, financial planners are looking for opportunities for assets under management, and the scope of fact-finding and discovery usually only looks to a client's individually owned assets. But clients who are beneficiaries of trusts can also be beneficiaries of large buckets of investment assets that have been transferred from generation to generation. And with the right analysis, and with the assistance of an estate planning attorney, these opportunities can be identified. And if you're worried about the fiduciary liabilities that might go along with this, there are workarounds that we can look at that will help you to reduce any sort of fiduciary liability that you, as a financial advisor, might incur. Now, with that being said, a big concern in the financial planning world is capturing or maintaining relationships when assets shift between generations, because younger generations may not want to use their parents' advisor. But this is a way that you can maybe allow yourself to perpetuate that relationship and add value. This is something that a lot of financial advisors don't like to do, because, for one, it's going to require you to change the way you do things. And it may require you to, in your mind, pry too much. But there's a lot of opportunity here, and there's one thing to consider, because as an estate planning drafter, what I've observed is that most estate plans no longer leave assets directly to the next generation. They now create lifetime trusts for lower generations. So most planning in the next few decades is going to shift to planning around those types of trusts. So not only financial advisors, but also estate planners are always going to have to look to, have there been trusts set up by a parent or ancestor for my client? But because of this trend, there will be a massive shift of wealth in trusts in the next 2 decades. And a lot of financial institutions have recognized this. Why do you think you're seeing institutional trustees as a major growth area in the financial planning and wealth management world? Well, it's because of this exact trend. So individual CFPs can really insert themselves in this process as well, especially given trends in the way that trusts can be managed and administered under local and state law. So where should I start? Well, first you're going to have to distinguish between existing trusts versus trusts which do not yet exist. Now, this may be a little bit more difficult. It's not always going to be the case that a client has access to their parents' estate planning documents when their parents are living. But if they do, it may be good for them to all have this conversation as a family as to how those assets will be managed. Now, this is something that, in the past, parents don't like their kids to know what they're getting, but I think if there's an intent around there being values attached to that money, it's helpful for everybody to come to the same table. Now, even though there's no immediate opportunity, there's a couple points here. One, even though this is idle money, it's something that you could help manage in the future when the need arises. And two, you may even identify opportunities to plan for the parents as well. Now, this is something that has flown under the radar, but nobody that I've seen is out there advising on the receipt of inheritances. And that's going to be a huge planning gap in the future. So that being said, if you want to structure your practice around that, or maybe look at that as a niche, that is an untapped opportunity. Now, once you've looked to trusts that don't exist yet, now you have to look to funded trusts. They might have been funded either due to a lifetime gift or due to a transfer at death from a parent or an ancestor. So with this, in most cases, other than some isolated scenarios with blind trusts that are allowed in some states, there's a duty of a trustee of existing trusts that are irrevocable to provide periodic accountings and inventories of trust assets to the beneficiaries. So, if you have a client who's a beneficiary and they're not already getting that info, this is a great opportunity for you to kind of grease the wheels to see if they can get that info. And if they do have it, then that's an easy part of the discovery process for you to see what assets are out there and what opportunities there might be, examining investment and liquidity opportunities within a trust portfolio. But once you have that info, you have to also look to who is the trustee, because it's the trustee and not the client who's going to make the initial decision on who manages those assets. But in some cases, the client, as a beneficiary, has the ability to remove, replace, or add on additional trustees now or in the future. Now, it may be the case that the client may even become trustee at a certain age if they're not already serving in that capacity. Now, if the client is trustee, obviously it's an easy sell to take on management of the trust portfolio. But if you have an individual other than the client as trustee, can be very polarized, and I hear a lot of talk about institutional trustees and the headaches that they can bring, and sometimes that's overblown, and usually the general theme of that is that it's very difficult to get distributions from a trust in the case of an institutional trustee. But I've also seen this become a very polarized issue with individual trustees as well, such as if you have a parent who names another family member or family friend to act as trustee, they tend to hold on to that role with an iron fist and take a lot of pride in it. And also approach your client, who's the beneficiary of the trust, from a position of distrust where the trustee wants to hold on to those assets and parent the client and not make distributions, and also run up huge bills in the spirit of acting as trustee and overseeing this intense moral duty they've carried on and taken on to protect the beneficiary from themselves. But I always like to remind people in that situation that the term trust is designed to go both ways. Beneficiaries should trust the trustee and vice versa. So when that relationship breaks down, and that distrust may be a situation where it does break down, it may be important to look at, would a removal and replacement of the trustee make sense? And if the trustee is an institution, it may also be fairly easy to seek a trustee change, at least to another institution, which may custody your assets or whatever the case might be, especially if your client is the only beneficiary. So, in that case, it really kind of becomes a comparison of fees to determine, who has the better fee structure for both serving as a trustee and also an investment management fee. How is that leveraged between multiple platforms or multiple institutions or trustees? Now, there's only so much you can do here. You're going to have to go find an estate planning attorney to assist you with this process. Now, a common gripe against estate planning attorneys is that there's a lack of reciprocity of referrals from financial advisors. It tends to be a very one-sided relationship where estate planning attorneys benefit but don't send much business back. But in this process, attorneys can and must be your allies in examining trusts for opportunities of assets under management. And this may be a good kind of stick or carrot for the referral of clients to that attorney as well, especially when it comes to the trustee removal and replacement process. That can be a bear, and it has to be driven by an attorney if they're representing the client as a beneficiary. And fees tend to be a hurdle here. You may have to have a client front some of those fees, but on occasion they can be funded or reimbursed from the trust as an expense of administration. There's many other opportunities which may allow you to reduce your fiduciary liability if you take on the management of a trust portfolio. And the estate planning attorney can help you with that to mitigate some of that fiduciary liability, to look at relationships such as directed trusteeship or being a trust advisor. And I can't really give you a firm answer on those because they're largely dependent on state law. And that's going to vary based on where you might be, where the client might be, and where the existing trustee might be, and under which state's laws the trust might be created. So having said that, as I mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities here. We're going to get a little bit more technical with this. So we're going to continue this discussion in future episodes where, one, we'll look to directed trusteeship or advisor relationships to see how that could be a way that you could manage assets without necessarily risking a higher degree of fiduciary liability than you might have with an individual client. We'll also look to a general view of how maybe diversification is affected in an investment portfolio when you take into account an irrevocable trust, and what changes there, what enhanced duties are there with respect to diversification and growth of the assets, because no longer are you considering just the needs of your client, you're also looking to the needs of the future generations and maybe investing for either growth or income or a balance thereof. As always, if you have questions or topic suggestions, you can email those to me at griffin.bridgers@gmail.com. But thank you for listening to this episode of 10 Minutes with Griffin, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.